Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first panel session for day 2 of PID Awareness Week. Welcome everyone that's joined in person and all those joining online. This session will explore the benefits of a healthy speak-up culture in the public service and why it's important for public officials to speak up if they witness wrongdoing. Following some initial comments by the panel members, we will have time for the audience to ask questions. So please start thinking about your questions, and if you're joining online, please do put your questions in the chat. Just a quick reminder that PID Awareness Week sessions will be recorded and made available online throughout the week. And if you're in person, if you could just let the registration desk know if you've got any concerns about filming. We're fortunate to have 3 wonderful panellists for this session. The Honourable Helen Murrell SC, Commissioner of the Independent Commission Against Corruption, Sonia Minotillo, New South Wales Privacy Commissioner, and Graham Head, AO, Secretary of the Department of Customer Service. The Honourable Helen Murrell SC was appointed part-time Commissioner for a 5-year term from August 2022. Helen recently retired as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the ACT, a position she held since 2013. She was called to the New South Wales Bar in 1981 and appointed Senior Counsel in 1995. Prior to her role as Chief Justice, Helen was a Judge of the District Court of New South Wales. Her prior appointments include Deputy Chairperson of the New South Wales Medical Tribunal, Senior Judge of the Drug Court of New South Wales, President of the Equal Opportunity Tribunal of New South Wales, and Deputy President of the Administrative Decisions Tribunal of New South Wales Equal Opportunity Division, and Acting Judge of the Land and Environment Court of New South Wales. Helen has a long-standing interest in therapeutic jurisprudence and judicial education, and from 2016 to 2020 was Chair of the National Judicial College of Australia. Sonia Minotillo was appointed as New South Wales Privacy Commissioner in March 2025, having served as Acting Privacy Commissioner since August 2023. Prior to being appointed Privacy Commissioner, Sonia was the Director of Investigation and Reporting at the Information and Privacy Commission New South Wales, leading the IPC's regulatory functions, including the conduct of reviews, complaints, investigations, proactive audits, and performance reporting across both information access and privacy legislative regimes. As the Director of Investigation Reporting, Sonia was also the IPC's Chief Audit Executive. Sonia has worked in other senior roles in New South Wales Government and the non-profit sectors in the fields of industrial relations and employment rights and obligations under New South Wales and Commonwealth legislation. Sonia holds a range of tertiary qualifications in commerce, public administration and government investigations, and is a member of the Institute of Company Directors. Graham Head became the Secretary of New South Wales Department of Customer Service in November 2023 after holding numerous leadership positions in both the public and private sectors. He is an experienced organisational leader with an extensive track record in policy development, innovation and reform, and a keen focus on customer experience and streamlined service delivery. He has 25 years of experience at senior executive level in government, 17 of which were at the Chief Executive level. Graham previously served as the inaugural New South Wales Public Service Commissioner and held senior executive positions across government agencies including the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission, Sydney Catchment Authority and the former New South Wales Department of Commerce and Department of Premier and Cabinet. He's a Fellow of the Institute of Public Administration of Australia and was made an Officer of the Order of Australia in the 2019 Australia Day Honours list. Please join me in welcoming the panel. And with that, I'll hand over to Helen for her opening remarks.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thanks for your kind remarks. I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, pay my respects to elders past and present. In many ways, this always has been and always will be Aboriginal land. So, the value of speaking up in identifying risk and serious wrongdoing, it's a topic that answers itself, isn't it? why is ICAC so interested in PID? Well, really they're the core of our work. Obviously, people make disclosures that those in management or perhaps in investigative positions don't know about matters they don't know about, or about aspects of those matters that those in more senior positions don't know about. And if people are not happy to make disclosures to their agency, of course they may feel free to make the disclosure to ICAC. So in 24-25, which was a typical year, we received just under 2,500 reports, and of those, about half were voluntary reports from either members of the public or from public officials, made voluntarily. And of those, about 250 were from public officials, and they were assessed against the criteria for assessment of public interest disclosures, and they met those criteria. But of course, there are a lot more matters that came to us that were not through that channel, because of the 2,400, the ones that weren't voluntarily reported were mandatory reports. And they were mandatory reports from the principal officers of agencies, and often those matters had come from public officials within the agency and were themselves public interest disclosures. So you're probably aware that there are two ways, as I've mentioned, of bringing a matter to the attention of ICAC, either through a Section 10, that's a voluntary report, directly to ICAC, or under Section 11, which is the mandatory report from the principal officer of an agency and other people, but we'll leave it with that. And just to emphasise, as you know, there's a legal obligation to make the mandatory report. Now, as you know, ICAC just deals with complaints of corruption, and the PID Act deals with serious wrongdoing, which is much broader than just corruption. But corruption is a very important aspect of serious wrongdoing. I don't know statistically how many serious wrongdoing reports are reports of corruption, but I suspect that it is quite a lot. And of course, the other thing to point out is that corrupt conduct under the PID Act might be somewhat different from corrupt conduct under our Act. We've got a few hurdles to leap through before we report a matter as corrupt conduct under our Act. It's quite a focused definition, which has, shall we say, over the years been politically influenced, and to some people may not make a lot of sense in some respects, but there we are. So how we deal with it, how it comes to us and how we deal with it, of course we receive the report. That could be a report made under the mandatory requirements, it could be made by telephone, it could be made anonymously, it could be made through the website. And so there are a variety of ways that these reports come to us. We acknowledge the receipt of the report, obviously, and then it goes to our assessments team, which is sort of a triaging team. And one of the first things they do is to work out whether it's a PID, and if it is a PID, then certain protections have to be put into place. Obviously confidentiality, there's a discussion with the discloser, assuming that they're not anonymous. Who else knows about it? Have you disclosed it to your agency? And we also ask them to keep it confidential so that we can pursue our inquiries effectively. And we talk about possible courses of action, what might happen with the disclosure, and then it's processed like any other complaint made to the organisation. So the assessments team will look at it, they'll work out whether it is about corrupt conduct or maybe it's about maladministration, so wouldn't come within our jurisdiction and might need to be sent elsewhere from the outset. Sometimes, or not infrequently, I think, the agency that has reported it is dealing with it apparently effectively, so we might just leave it with the agency and ask them to let us know what's happening. And if, obviously it might develop to a point where it does have to come to us, but happy to leave it with the agency if they're dealing with it effectively. A lot of reports are quite speculative. People have put 2 and 3 together and come up with 17. So we need to look at, we can't pursue speculation. But then on the other hand, sometimes we get what are borderline speculative complaints, and when they start accumulating on the same topic, then we have to look at them with increasing care, because sometimes a lot of those speculative reports can between them contain bits and pieces that add up to something that is worth investigating, and that does happen. So we always keep a record of reports that have been made and what the outcome was and why, and when a new report is made about the same general topic or person, then we always go back in assessing what's to happen next to see what's happened in the past and how frequently they've been the topic of complaint, and what other bits and pieces of evidence might be out there. And then only a very few of the complaints go a lot further, but they can go to a preliminary investigation, they can go then to a full investigation and a public inquiry, and then of course to a report generally, well, I think almost invariably a report that's released publicly. So in terms of people who make complaints, we would like to think that we support them quite well. From the start, with the assessments team, we provide the disclosures and witnesses a list of support services, and we may assist to connect them with those services. Then we provide information to the witnesses. I mean, a disclosure becomes a witness. I mean, it's really using those terms interchangeably, although there may also be other witnesses. They're connected with our witness liaison officer. It's a relatively new role at ICAC, and the witness liaison officer will contact the witnesses to assess their wellbeing and keep an eye on them if there are any concerns. Of course, they don't discuss the evidence or the actual inquiry. They discuss the witnesses' health concerns and general concerns. Then we're helping to, well, we're not helping, we are developing a guide for witnesses and their lawyers, and that will assist witnesses and lawyers to understand the process of giving evidence and accessing legal advice. And finally, an important member of the team is coming on board to provide support to witnesses who wish to have that support. So from my perspective, I think it's important not just to think about what the PID Act does. It provides a statutory framework within which a good culture can sit, but it doesn't create that culture. It just provides the framework. So it's really about embedding a culture to improve not just reporting, but your workplace generally. This is the framework that has been proposed by Timothy Clark in his book, The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. Psychological safety, he says, has 4 aspects. A person that's a staff member feels included, safe to learn, then safe to contribute, and finally, safe to question and challenge. And the speak up culture, of course, sits within that most developed and last quadrant, challenger safety. According to Clark, innovation within an organisation will not occur or will be very much hobbled if the organisation doesn't allow challenger safety or doesn't promote challenger safety. That's where staff feel permission to challenge and contributions are respected, a diversity of views are respected. His key question to assess whether your organisation has challenger safety is, do you consistently invite others to challenge the status quo in order to make things better? And are you personally prepared to be wrong? So this is a sort of approach we need to provide to encourage public interest disclosures. We need to put the disclosure at the centre, put the PID maker at the centre of consideration, walk in their shoes, maintain their confidentiality, and in case people don't feel safe, we do need to have the fallback of the ability to report to an external agency, in many cases to ICAC. So I guess the key messages I have is that ICAC depends upon PIDs, and that a speak-up culture is fundamental to the welfare of your staff and to the development and progress of your organisation. Thanks for the opportunity of making those remarks.
Thank you, Helen. I love the window into the world of ICAC. It sounds like a fascinating experience navigating the process. I might hand over to Graham now for his remarks.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks everyone for coming. I echo Helen's remarks on acknowledging country and extend my respect to Gadigal elders past and present as well. I'm just going to provide a few reflections this morning. My first involvement with formal PID frameworks was when the first then called Protected Disclosures Act was introduced in 1994, I think, if memory serves me correctly, and I was part of the team within the EPA who had to work out how we implemented that internally, working with our HR people and our legal people at the time. I think the current laws are the third major iteration as that system's evolved, and my impression is it has evolved well, but it's a very difficult thing to get right, to do, as Helen says, encourage people to report things, to support them when they do that, and to manage what arises from that. I guess I've had principal officer obligations in New South Wales for about 13 of the, or 14 of the 18 years that I've been a CEO, so I've had a lot to do with reporting matters. Many of the matters I've had to report to ICAC or to other integrity agencies have arisen through public interest disclosures, so it's a really, really, really important system. And I guess my prior experience as a regulator had attuned me to the fact that people observing things and coming forward is often a very, very important basis for determining wrongdoing. I had responsibility at the EPA back in the early 90s, and indeed its predecessor organisation, the State Pollution Control Commission, for a little thing called Pollution Line. And that was where members of the public rang to report things they'd observed in their community that they thought were breaches of environmental laws. And back then, through the 90s, most of our successful prosecutions actually started with a member of the public observing wrongdoing in their community, having a place to report that, and then things being properly investigated. So in a sense, the PID framework is a version of that, but within the sector where we ask our people to observe wrongdoing. I do think there are many challenges in getting this right. It is clearly, given today's theme, unquestionable that there is not just value in people speaking up, it is essential that people speak up. My observations, though, is that are that people often struggle to understand what is captured by serious wrongdoing, and therefore that can create two problems. Either people hang back and don't tell us things that really ought to be raised, or their misunderstanding is different, and this becomes an avenue to pursue grievances that are not serious wrongdoing. I think the task for leadership teams is to go deeper into what is required to educate and support people so that these tools are being used precisely for the purpose that they're intended, which is about disclosures about serious wrongdoing where the public interest is at stake. And I think really a lot of the education, things like PID Awareness Week are extremely important, but really every week should be PID Awareness Week. We want our people, when they're inducted, to understand how to recognise serious wrongdoing. We want people to avail themselves of the opportunities that are present in their organisations to report that. We want managers to understand what their obligations are and how to support people who make a choice. And we do need all of our people to understand the difference between reports that are genuinely about serious wrongdoing and not, because when those things become conflated, unpacking them becomes extremely difficult in the PID context, where people might believe that they've made a PID, there's no obvious wrongdoing at all involved, and many principal officers will have observed this, and people in this room. It becomes quite difficult then to work out what the appropriate actions are to take to protect team safety. If somebody is making claims that are not supported by any evidence, we've got to provide safety for that person, safety for the team. So I guess my view is it is complicated to get this right, and much more focus on high quality education regularly, review of cases, feedback to people, learning in real time about how we're implementing these arrangements is very, very, very important. And making sure that you've got a commitment to good resources in the organisation. We have a hotline in DCS that people can use. Since I took on the role of secretary, I've significantly increased the resourcing in the investigations area. We've had a focus in town halls and routine communications on integrity issues, on the proper management of public resources. So I think a very layered approach is critical if you're going to, in a sense, operationalise the idea that it is valuable to speak up. And I feel as though a lot of our work educating people remains at a very high level, and that means that we're not actually getting all of the value that we could out of this system. I worry every day that there are both people who've observed things that haven't spoken up, and also that sometimes there are people speaking up where they're not primarily discussing matters of public interest or wrongdoing, but it's become a grievance mechanism. So I think leadership teams have to understand, how do we deal with grievances? How do we deal with serious wrongdoing? And they really need multiple points of reinforcing those systems so that people are in fact in the right pathway and that they feel well supported. The only other thing I wanted to do is to pick up on one of Helen's remarks about challenger safety, and it goes to my point around adversarial relationships. Even in the last few months, I've dealt with situations where somebody has been encouraged and supported to challenge ideas in a team. But when other people disagree, which is also there in a challenge, it's a dynamic between people. It's very hard to get the conditions right where people feel safe challenging, but are also then prepared to have a debate or a dialogue with people who don't necessarily agree with the points that are being made. And I have had people say to me that they find being disagreed with in group situations traumatising. Now, somehow or other we have to, if we're serious about people speaking up, we have to create environments where professional people of goodwill can challenge and debate respectfully with each other, and that's not experienced as a personal threat. And so there's huge amounts of heavy lifting to be done on culture as it relates to creating some of that safety, I think. I'll leave it there. I'm sure you'll have questions.
Thanks, Graham. My hand over to Sonia now.
Thanks. Pardon me. Morning, everyone, and thanks for having me. I'd like to also echo both Helen and Graham's acknowledgement of country and pay my respects to Elders past and present. Pardon me. I'm just going to make a few broad observations around... Drop it? Would that be better?
Yeah.
Okay. Around the Public Interest Disclosures Act. And the idea that sits behind why it's important in terms of the integrity that it supports within the public sector and why that matters for the purposes of responsible and good government to all of us as public officials. Because without it, and without that responsible accountability mechanism, trust in us and in our institutions and in government is diminished. And once diminished, it's incredibly hard to restore and put back to the kind of level that we reasonably should expect as a society. In terms of the contraventions that exist in the PID Act, we're all familiar with fraud, maladministration, corruption as concepts that have been a part of the PID Act for a very long time. Privacy contraventions were introduced most recently with the amendments and the introduction of the new Act. And I think we all today recognise the importance of privacy to us as individuals, to our interactions in community, in society and with government. And as public officials, the really critical role we all play in the preservation of people's privacy, the protection of that information and the safeguarding of it, and the amount of information that we interact with people on that is their personal information, much of which is necessary in order for all of us to be able to exercise our functions as government officers. And so ensuring that we have the right settings that are in place that looks after that information, that treats it the way that it needs to be treated, that preserves it as it should be, is really critical in terms of the framework and the PID Act. At the IPC, we have a duality of roles. We're both an agency, but we're also an integrity agency. And so whilst we have responsibilities to our employees in terms of building that culture and building that awareness for our people within the organisation, we also have a function that goes to external receipt of reports about privacy or information access contraventions. Both commissioners at the IPC are integrity agencies and can receive public interest disclosures that relate to contraventions, serious contraventions of the Government Information Access Act or privacy. And I think in terms of our responsibility there is to receive, to manage, to process, but to also recognise that within those PIDs it might actually give us intelligence and information about how we can change and improve systems, processes, practices, so that we can actually have a framework where we can anticipate and prevent wrongdoing before it even occurs or eventuates. And I think a comment that Graham said that I would echo importantly is occasions like today in terms of building awareness and raising our commitment and our culture around it are really important But like privacy, it can't be a set and forget. It needs to be continuous. It needs to be part of what we do and how we have our conversations within our organisations on a day-to-day basis. So I would encourage all of you and all of us as leaders that when we leave here today, the conversation doesn't end when Privacy Awareness Week, Public Interest Disclosures Week concludes this week, but that we take these conversations and that we continue to engage with our staff, with our communities, with people that we work with to ensure that we continue to commit to the framework that is intended and the objectives and the goals that the PID Act promotes and supports in terms of the kind of community, the kind of values that we all support as public officials and that are critical to responsible government. Might leave it at that.
Thanks, Sonia. I think that comment around how trust is hard to build but easy to lose, I think, is an important point. I might move on to some questions, but questions from the audience and online, please feel free to get them coming through. I might go to Helen, you first. You touched on the benefits or the value of disclosures to ICAC's work. Did you want to expand a bit more on how a healthy speak-up culture can create benefits to identifying wrongdoing and the benefits of speaking out when they see wrongdoing?
Okay, it's a very big question, but I guess the thing is that in most of the matters that we end up investigating through to public inquiry or through to a fairly developed point, there were just so many red flags along the way which were obvious with the benefit of hindsight, but probably, well, obviously not at the time, or not to people in management. And so I think the thing is that if there's a speak-up culture, then people will identify matters early in the piece and they'll raise them, and perhaps they're not indicative of corruption. They might be indicative of just poor administration or something like that. But the thing with corruption is that it starts out small. It starts out with small things that perhaps are just properly labelled as maladministration, and then it develops. So it's a matter of people just speaking up about something they're concerned about, and maybe it's something and maybe it's not. But a lot of money could be saved, a lot of time could be saved, and a lot of reputation could be saved if people spoke up when they saw something that might be corrupt.
Thanks, Helen. Graham, did you want to add anything to that?
No, look, I think that's absolutely, right. And even little things, you know, I have 3 regulators as part of the DCS portfolio. One of the things I would observe is that some areas of public service craft, if you like, have sort of deteriorated a bit over the last 10 or 15 years. And so you have some areas of expertise that are not in as much evidence as they used to be. So that thing of when you're a regulator always testing what the limits of power are, you know, often you will have people enthusiastically wanting to pursue something. And I mean, I will always say, well, having read the Act, I'm not 100% sure that that's actually within power. Now, regulators should be regularly having discussions, always, about our regulatory toolkit, what does it allow us to do. If that's normalised, then I think what Helen's talking about is much more easily done, because you are creating an environment where people are used to critiquing their approach, and they might say, well, we'd really like to do that, but legal have said really, you know, as far as we can go is X. Often people get themselves into strife, not because they start out seeking to do the wrong thing, but they're insufficiently curious, they're not constantly challenging themselves about the utilisation of powers that the Parliament's given them. So I think the speak up culture is partly about enabling people to call things out, and also importantly about encouraging people to routinely reflect on practice in a, how are we approaching the work? Do we do things in the right way? Do we understand the limits of our power? So
I might come back to that point in a little bit, Graham, because I'm interested in your insights as a head of a very large agency in a bigger portfolio, but I might ask a question of that in a second. But Sonia, is there anything you wanted to add about the benefits of a healthy speak-up culture?
Sure. Look, I think the thing that, in addition to both Helen and Graham's comments, that I would add is I see one of the real important benefits is that if you have an environment that supports speak up, you're actually creating an environment where doing the right thing is expected and is normalised. And once that occurs, I think it becomes easier to have the types of conversations within your agencies to challenge your thinking, to challenge one another in a really respectful way, but that actually in the long term allows you to achieve better outcomes, better results. And so everybody is the beneficiary. But I think it's really that important component of really not institutionalising an environment that sort of silence is normal.
That actually dovetailed quite nicely with one of the panel sessions we had yesterday about how we can embed speak-up culture in organisational DNA. And Graham, on that point, we talked about how there's no one-size-fits-all, and that culture is not something that is necessarily uniform across an organisation. I'm just interested in your insights where, in a large organisation, how do you make sure that the culture across the organisation, across geographic areas, can be sustained to encourage speaking out?
Look, it's an interesting question, and I think about, I grew up in the health system, so I started life, it was halfway up, sorry. I started life in the health system as a nurse, and a long time ago. And when I reflect back, we had a brilliant and really very ahead of her time director of nursing, a woman named Yvonne Winter, who really was very focused on the ethical conduct of clinicians and very focused on a sort of high uniform standard of care to people. And she did that in an organisation that employed 5,000 people, Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, and really the entire nursing workforce understood very clearly what the expectations were, and the framework for not getting things right was remedial in the first instance, but then, transgressions beyond that weren't really tolerated. The health system is a coherent system. So I think size is often not the determinant of how easy or hard it is to promulgate these things. It's the sort of coherence, complexity of organisations. So DCS is interesting because it's a federated organisation where, the verticals are very strong. Revenue, New South Wales, digital, the regulatory divisions, service, New South Wales. So working at that horizontal level in governance has been one of the challenges for me coming in. But I think what enables you to make progress in this space is to constantly be focusing on getting the basics right. Like, if we're serious about a speak-up culture, do our people know where they can go to raise things? It's much better for people to be raising anything that's on their mind than self-censoring. But what we have to do is make sure that we're resourcing that so that people can assess what they're hearing, work with people to either channel those things properly into the PID process, or if they're frustrations about things that don't concern wrongdoing, to make sure that those people are supported in having those issues addressed. So I think understanding for your organisation, what does the business look like? What are the different things people are dealing with? How do you meet people where they are, rather than creating a sort of one-size-fits-all that won't necessarily work if you're a building inspector in the Building Commission or a digital designer in Digital New South Wales, where your experience in the sector and also what you do every day looks and feels very different.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. Might move on to another question, and I might start with you, Helen. What do you perceive as significant risks for an agency that doesn't have a strong speak-up culture?
Well, obviously it's going to be more prone or more exposed to corruption or general maladministration, and to attracting corrupt actors, and so corruption can become quite systemic. There's two things that we often see at ICAC that precede and accompany corruption, and the same would be true of general maladministration, I would imagine. One is nepotism. So it's recruiting pals, maybe for sort of good reasons. You think they did a good job in some other connection. And so we see these boys' clubs or girls' clubs, or just, clubs of different types, clubbiness. So nepotism is very counterproductive. And then the other thing, which is often associated with nepotism or can be independent, is a bullying culture. And bullying, unfortunately, is still very widespread in many agencies that we deal with anyway, often male-dominated ones, but not necessarily. Some can be have women in very senior positions. And so obviously in a bullying culture, people are not prepared to, not equipped, not prepared, not supported to stand up to bullies. And when you see a bully and you see a complaint about corruption, to me, I'm minded to look into it, because bullies are often the corrupt actors, and they just can fob other people off. And sometimes the bullies have the appearance of competence. They might even be very competent. They're just not at all consultative. And so I think we seriously need to address bullying in the context that it goes hand in hand with corruption and general maladministration.
Thanks, Helen. Sonia, do you want to add anything?
Look, I'd add two comments, and I think this is true of any agency. If you're a government agency or a council, it applies equally. I think there's a risk of cultural drift. So if you have an environment where there isn't a culture of speaking up, then I think you lose alignment with your values in terms of your organisation, and you start to shift in a direction where your values aren't important to what you do, to how you do it and why you're doing it. And I think the other thing that arises is we can develop some blind spots in our decision making because we presume that there is nothing to be concerned about, or we assume a position of sort of stability and that there are no issues of concern that we need to pay our attention to. And that runs the risk of serious concerns, serious wrongdoing being left unaddressed and harms persisting, but also the opportunity for us to actually challenge ourselves, look at how we're doing what we're doing. Is it right for the moment? Can we do it better? Are all opportunities that we lose by not having a culture that speaks up, that raises issues of concern generally and specifically.
Certainly not a set and forget, that's sure. Graham?
I just wanted to pick up on a really important point flowing from Helen's observation about bullies, and in particular where you've got competent bullies. I've made the point to the ELT at DCS and in other senior forums that when you're recruiting people, you're making really one of the most profound decisions that you make in terms of the character and ability of your organisation. You cannot, in all good conscience, sign off on a recruitment for somebody who will be leading people if you know they have poor people management skills. When you do that, you are deciding that you're prepared to have a culture which can be oppressive or where people struggle to feel heard and supported both in the doing of their work and when they're reporting these things. So, you know, very basic things. I've noticed since I came back that hiring is often delegated way, way down. And I find that extraordinary, really. This is, in terms of protecting the character of the organisation, the decisions you make about who is going to work in the organisation are really, really very critical. So looking at your recruitment process, looking to see whether or not people who are known to struggle to be effective people leaders are being promoted. That can often speak to both the nepotism point and the sort of knowing appointment of bullies into roles, and look at what best practice recruitment would look like for your organisation. It's critical around trust. I mean, we often talk about building trust. The English philosopher Honora O'Neill, Baroness O'Neill, writes quite extensively on this point, and she says we shouldn't talk about building trust because trust is something that's given to you by the people that you're seeking it from, and the task for us is to understand what trustworthiness looks like and to be doing all of the things within our control to make your organisation trustworthy. And so if you look at your basic processes like hiring, etc., one of the things you should be asking yourself, or hiring managers should be, is will the decision I'm about to make us more or less trustworthy? And if you have to talk yourself into signing off on that, you're about to make a bad decision.
Sensible words. Last question before I throw open to the audience. Helen, I'm interested in your thoughts, and particularly drawing on ICAC's wealth of reporting and guidance materials and processes, how agencies can better promote the value of speaking up to identify wrongdoing.
Well, I do think it's about building culture. It's not about saying we want you all to speak up. It's got to be built from the bottom up. And I think the point that Graham's been making about trustworthiness is critical. So it's about building the culture. It's not about doing a lot of talking about speaking up. But I also agree with the point that was made, I think, earlier by Sonia about the need to constantly revisit it and make sure people are educated in the processes and the protections and so on, to constantly remind them of it. But I think Graham made a point earlier that often we deal with this at a high level. We need to deal with it at a very basic level. What are the tools and what do you need to do? Very concrete and practical. Yeah.
Thanks. Sonia?
Look, I think there's a couple of things. I think as leaders, we need to model the behaviours that we expect, and if we see behaviour that is not right, then we need to call it out. And I think by modelling those behaviours, we give courage to others to follow in our path. And I think the other thing is that we need to make it easy for people and not make it so difficult and complicated that people don't know how to do it. And I think that goes to Graham's comment about getting some of the basics really right and not over-engineering those processes so that by default you're building in a process that is impossible for someone to navigate to be able to speak up. So you've got a speak up culture, but only in name, not in actuality.
Yeah, good point, Sonia. Graham?
I agree with all of what's been said. I suppose, building from Sonia's point about modelling things, I think, I mean, even in my organisation's about 13,000 people, so it's a lot. But in most of the town halls that I do, we talk about integrity issues. I usually have the rest of the ELT in part or full as part of whatever we're doing in those events. That's just one example, but people need to hear you as the principal officer of an organisation talking about these things. Then it helps them to feel safe if the other senior people in the organisation are present when you say those things. And the other thing is, you've got to get out by yourself. I've never travelled with an entourage. This idea of the principal officer of the department sort of being a remote figure is not what you want, which means you've got to get out, talk to people where they work. All of that helps to create a sense that you're open to hearing things as they emerge rather than needing everything filtered through layers. If people know that they can approach you and raise things that they might be anxious about, not that you want to be the principal point of contact in an organisation for 13,000 people, but it gives people licence to put their hand up. So you need to be doing a whole lot of things normally which introduce the characteristics of a speak-up culture in the day-to-day experience that people have of how you interact with them and your expectations about professional conduct and professional, we don't talk about it anymore, but professional etiquette. The most powerful lesson I had as a young professional was from an old-style charge sister. And she was retiring the year I started, which meant that she was probably born in about 1918, and she'd been injured on a Navy ship where she was a nurse in World War II. She was ferocious and brilliant, and I was being a smart aleck 19 or 20-year-old complaining a bit too loudly about somebody I was working with, and she called me over and she said, "You'll probably go a long way, but pay attention to this. Our patients are just interested in seamless care. They're not interested in whether you like nurse so-and-so or whether you want to socialise with people out of work. So you find a way of working with people that is about the people you serve, not about yourself." And I can still picture all of the detail of that scene, and it was a very important guiding point about professional etiquette, which is really about getting the work done in service of the beneficiaries of that work. And some of getting that right helps to create speak-up culture, I think.
That's very insightful for a 19-year-old Graham. But I think that connection back to what it means to be a public servant, I think, is critical in that. Okay, we have now time for questions from the floor or online. I think we've got one in the room.
That's it. Thank you very much to everyone for all of your comments. Wendy Clarkson, Graham, I've helped you from time to time with some of your challenges with the various agencies that you've worked with. I was very intrigued by your comment about the emerging nature of the legislation, starting from the Protected Disclosures Act back in '94. What strikes me is that currently what's holding people back from speaking up is that very real fear of reprisals in the workplace. And it does happen indirectly through bullying, as you've mentioned. It happens in a number of very insidious ways. The current legislation puts in the protections after the fact, apart from the confidentiality, of course, but it only will provide a sanction if someone has been caught doing the reprisal action. I guess I want to throw it open to the panel. What do you think needs to happen so that the legislation is more effective in terms of dissuading people or deterring people from taking reprisal action?
Prosecution. ICAC has some responsibility in relation to where reprisal action has been taken. I guess we need to get some runs on the board.
I'm feeling safe as a speak-up culture here. I guess my point really is because it is quite often done surreptitiously, and I can think of a matter that I'm working on at the moment where someone is being bullied terribly because she was a whistleblower and exposed some serious fraud within the organisation. But these people that are possibly responsible are doing it behind closed doors. And even if I was able to get enough evidence to make a referral potentially to the police probably will never have enough evidence to prosecute. So how do you get around that?
Well, if the matter's with ICAC, we have powers with surveillance devices and seizing phones and things to actually see what might have happened behind closed doors. I guess it'll need to be quite serious for those powers to be implemented, because you can't just do it on a suspicion, and obviously a lot of the time it will be like that. But I'm serious when I say if we can get some runs on the board and people can see what has happened to people who've taken reprisal action, that will be a very good thing.
Yeah, I think it's very hard to legislate the sort of perfect model about dealing with these very complex situations. On one level, they're pretty significant sanctions, reverse onus of proof, etc. That's, and where, often you're dealing with quite complicated situations where there's the wrongdoing event. There's also other historical cultural issues. There are pre-existing poor relationships. You've got obligations as the principal officer under the Work Health and Safety Ledge at the same time as under the PID Act. Sometimes the PID maker themselves will be the subject of bullying allegations. We ought not pretend that this is straightforward, because I think therein lies a lot of the problem. I think we have to make things simple for people who are speaking up, and then we need to lean into the complexity of properly supporting people in those situations. And some of that is about working in quite intensive ways with people to try and deal with the dynamic in a way that they're comfortable with not being any form of reprisal, but sometimes diffusing some of the tension within teams. So I think the problem is we often start assuming that, well, if you just apply this bit of the rule in this way, everything will be fine. But you're dealing with people in very charged environments. I think often there's insufficient personal support for those people. So in a team where these sorts of allegations are being made, and often a lot of complexity associated with turning up to work every day. The identity of the PID maker is, of course, confidential, but people often, draw their own conclusions about various things. So I think we need to spend more time thinking about complex case management in these areas, what we learn from things that have worked well, what we learn from things that haven't gone well. I was saying to one of the colleagues here earlier on that I'm often surprised when ICAC's finished doing a report. I always read the corruption prevention chapters at the end, and I talk to them about my colleagues, and everybody reads the salacious stuff up the front, and no one reads the corruption prevention stuff, which is like a pot of gold, and it does actually help with some of these things about what could have been done differently.
Thanks, Graham. Thanks, Helen. And just a special mention, I think, also to an important function that we have in the Ombudsman's office. It's the whistleblower support function, and that's available for any public official, whether they are thinking about or currently through a process of making a disclosure with any agency. That's free and confidential support that can be provided through that avenue. We're out of time, unfortunately, so that means that our online questions or questions in the room will be cut short. But what we will do is we'll endeavour to answer those questions and post them on the Ombudsman website. But last but certainly not least, a massive thank you to the panel. It's been a really great conversation about the value and importance of a speak up culture. So thank you. Please join me in congratulating. Thank you.